The battle for Haven's Rest ended on the 8th day, with something that HFY had not expected to witness. The Korth Empire, faced with casualties exceeding 50% of their invasion force and no prospect of quick victory, requested a ceasefire. General Vextor, who had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire, admitted defeat to a human force that numbered less than 100 combat-effective personnel. Colonel Jake Morrison accepted the Korth surrender with the same calm professionalism he had displayed throughout the conflict. There was no celebration among the human forces, no expressions of triumph or relief. They processed the enemy's surrender as if it were a routine administrative task, documenting everything for future reference. What followed challenged every assumption HFY had developed about human nature. The victorious humans began providing medical assistance to wounded Korth soldiers. They shared food and clean water with their former enemies. They established refugee camps for displaced Korth civilians and organized supply convoys to deliver humanitarian aid to areas damaged during the fighting. The mercy was genuine but carried an undertone that made HFY's fur stand on end. The humans were not helping their defeated enemies out of compassion or moral obligation. They were demonstrating their strength through acts of calculated generosity. The message was clear. They could afford to be merciful because they had never been in any real danger. Lieutenant Commander Scott Warner explained the situation to his staff with casual honesty that was more terrifying than any threat. The conflict had proceeded exactly as human planners had predicted. Korth resistance had collapsed within acceptable parameters. Human casualties had remained below projected maximums. The entire operation was considered a successful field test. Warner expressed satisfaction that their newer weapon systems had performed according to specifications. He noted that several junior officers had gained valuable combat experience. He recommended that similar operations be conducted against other galactic powers to continue testing human military capabilities. Dr. Sarah Kim presented her research findings to the Human High Command with the enthusiasm of a scientist who had made significant discoveries. Her analysis of Korth biology had revealed several previously unknown vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future conflicts. She had developed 3 new weapon systems specifically designed to target Korth physiology. Kim's recommendation was that the Korth Empire be preserved as a test subject for ongoing research rather than completely destroyed. They could serve as a controlled population for testing biological weapons, psychological manipulation techniques, and social engineering experiments. The Empire's survival would depend entirely on their usefulness to human research objectives. HFY realized that the humans viewed other species not as potential allies or enemies, but as laboratory specimens. They studied alien civilizations with the same detached interest that other beings brought to examining microorganisms. Every interaction was an opportunity to gather data for future use. Captain Ryan Davis compiled psychological profiles of every Korth officer he had encountered during the conflict. His reports contained detailed assessments of their decision-making processes, stress responses, and susceptibility to various forms of manipulation. The information would be used to predict and control Korth behavior in future encounters. Davis had not simply defeated his enemies through psychological warfare. He had dissected their minds with surgical precision, mapping their fears and desires for future exploitation. The humans were building a comprehensive database of alien psychology that would allow them to manipulate any species they encountered. Admiral Kate Sullivan's final report to Earth contained recommendations that made HFY question everything he thought he knew about the nature of intelligence itself. Sullivan suggested that the current rate of galactic expansion was too slow to meet human strategic objectives. She recommended accelerating their timeline for establishing dominance over major trade routes and resource centers. The report discussed other galactic species as if they were weather patterns or geological features, obstacles to be managed rather than fellow sentient beings. Sullivan calculated the optimal rate at which civilizations could be conquered without triggering coordinated resistance from the remaining powers. Her strategic assessment concluded that the galaxy could be brought under complete human control within 2 centuries if current expansion rates were doubled. She recommended beginning preliminary operations against 3 additional species within the next standard year. As HFY prepared to depart Haven's Rest, he intercepted one final transmission that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A group of human soldiers were discussing their experiences during the battle, sharing stories and comparing notes on different combat techniques they had employed. The conversation was casual, almost cheerful. They talked about killing Korth, soldiers with the same tone other beings used to discuss sports scores. They critiqued each other's performance, offered suggestions for improvement, and expressed enthusiasm for their next deployment. What made the discussion truly horrifying was not the callousness but the intelligence behind it. These were not mindless killers driven by bloodlust. They were thinking beings who had carefully studied the art of warfare and took professional pride in their efficiency at ending lives. One soldier mentioned that he had kept detailed notes on the effectiveness of different weapons against Korth armor. Another discussed improvements he wanted to make to his equipment based on lessons learned during the fighting. They approached warfare as a craft to be mastered through practice and study. The journey back to Veltar space gave HFY time to analyze everything he had witnessed and contemplate the impossible decision facing him. The data he had collected would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. But the question was whether that change would save or doom the species he had sworn to protect. If he reported the full truth about human capabilities, the likely result would be a coordinated attack by every major galactic power against Earth and its colonies. Such an attack might succeed in eliminating the human threat, but it would also trigger the deadliest war in galactic history. Billions would die, and civilization itself might not survive. If he concealed the truth and submitted a sanitized report, the humans would continue their gradual expansion unimpeded. Other species would have no warning of the danger they faced. By the time anyone realized the true nature of the human threat, it would be too late to mount effective resistance. HFY spent days crafting two separate reports. The first was a standard academic analysis that portrayed humans as an aggressive but manageable species requiring diplomatic oversight. It contained enough truth to satisfy his scientific obligations while concealing the most dangerous discoveries. The second report contained everything: the full scope of human military capabilities, their long-term strategic plans, and their systematic preparation for galactic conquest. It was a document that would either save the galaxy from human domination or trigger a war that would destroy everything HFY's people held dear. When the Harmony Seeker docked at Veltar Prime, HFY faced the most important decision of his life. He could submit the sanitized report and hope that humanity would somehow evolve beyond their violent nature before it was too late. Or he could reveal the truth and accept responsibility for the consequences. Standing in the council chambers where his mission had begun, HFY made his choice. He submitted the academic report to the full council, classifying humans as a species requiring careful monitoring but not immediate intervention. The assembled representatives accepted his findings and filed them in the standard archives. But HFY also prepared the complete report and sealed it in the deepest security vaults with a classification level that would restrict access to only the most senior council members. His recommendation was that the file remain sealed unless human expansion exceeded certain predetermined parameters. In his private notes, HFY wrote a final assessment that would serve as his legacy. Humanity was not evil in any traditional sense. They were simply the most successful predators the galaxy had ever produced. They had evolved to view conflict not as a necessary evil but as a tool for advancement and survival. The humans had achieved something that no other species had managed. They had industrialized warfare, turning violence into a science that could be studied, refined, and perfected. They approached the destruction of their enemies with the same systematic intelligence that other species brought to art or philosophy. The galaxy had produced many dangerous species over the millennia, but none had combined human levels of intelligence, technological capability, and casual acceptance of violence. They were not monsters, which made them far more dangerous than any creature driven by simple hunger or rage. Monsters could be understood and contained. The humans were something unprecedented, a species of intelligent predators who had retained all their aggressive instincts while gaining the technology to satisfy them on a galactic scale. They were what nightmares would become if nightmares could think. HFY's final entry in his personal log contained a single sentence that would define the rest of his career. The seventh day brought an unexpected development that would forever change HFY's understanding of human nature. A Korth communications relay was damaged during the night fighting, and its automated systems began broadcasting unencrypted military files. Among the intercepted data was something that made the young researcher's blood freeze in his veins. The humans had gained access to the Korth military archives. Captain Ryan Davis appeared on the communication channels, speaking directly to General Vextor in flawless Korth High Command dialect. But Davis was not attempting negotiation or surrender. Instead, he began reciting details from Vextor's personal military record, including classified missions, tactical failures, and political relationships within the Korth hierarchy. The psychological warfare had evolved into something far more sophisticated and terrifying. Davis knew about Vextor's family connections, his religious beliefs, and even his childhood fears. He spoke of Korth military doctrine with the authority of someone who had studied it for years rather than days. The human had somehow gained access to information that should have been impossible for any outsider to obtain. HFY realized that the humans had not simply intercepted communications. They had infiltrated Korth computer systems, decoded their security protocols, and downloaded centuries of military records. The technical expertise required for such an operation suggested capabilities far beyond what any species should possess. After only 50 years in space, the intercepted files revealed something even more disturbing. The human attack on Haven's Rest was not a desperate defensive action. It was a carefully planned operation designed to test human military capabilities against a known enemy. The colony had been established specifically to attract Korth attention. The entire conflict was a human experiment. Admiral Kate Sullivan's classified reports described the engagement as a field test of new tactical doctrines. The human casualties were not tragic losses, but acceptable costs for gathering intelligence about Korth military capabilities. Every death, every sacrifice, every act of apparent heroism had been calculated in advance as part of a larger strategic plan. The human military files contained detailed analyses of dozens of galactic species, including comprehensive assessments of their military strengths, technological capabilities, and likely responses to various forms of aggression. The humans had been systematically studying every major power in the galaxy, preparing for conflicts that had not yet occurred. Dr. Sarah, Kim's research had produced weapons specifically designed to exploit the biological weaknesses of different alien species. Sonic weapons calibrated to disrupt Korth neural systems. Chemical agents that would be harmless to humans, but lethal to Veltar respiratory systems. Electromagnetic frequencies that would overload Theclon crystalline matrices. The humans had weaponized their knowledge of alien biology with the same methodical precision they brought to every other aspect of warfare. They were not content to simply fight their enemies. They wanted to understand them completely, to catalog their weaknesses, and to develop the most efficient possible methods for destroying them. HFY discovered files containing something the humans called strategic nuclear doctrine. The weapons described in these documents were capable of sterilizing entire planets, destroying all life forms down to the bacterial level. The humans possessed the technology to end civilizations, but had chosen not to deploy it during the current conflict. The restraint was not born of mercy or moral consideration. The files made it clear that nuclear weapons were withheld because their use would complicate human objectives in the sector. The complete destruction of Korth forces would eliminate valuable research opportunities and make it difficult to test other weapon systems. Lieutenant Commander Scott Warner discussed the nuclear option with his staff as casually as other species might debate lunch choices. The conversation was recorded in official military logs, treated as routine strategic planning. Warner expressed mild disappointment that the conflict would likely end before they could field test their newer fusion devices. The human capacity for long-term strategic thinking became apparent when HFY accessed their military planning. databases. The humans were not simply fighting the Korth Empire. They were simultaneously preparing for potential conflicts with 17 other galactic powers. Each species had been assigned threat levels, strategic priorities, and preliminary invasion plans. The Veltar Confederation, Zephai's own people, were classified as a low-priority target due to their peaceful nature and lack of strategic resources. But the humans had still developed detailed plans for conquering Veltar space, including optimal landing sites, key infrastructure targets, and estimated timeframes for complete pacification. Reading about the planned destruction of his homeworld, with the same clinical detachment used to describe agricultural yields, made Zephi physically ill. The humans had calculated exactly how many Veltar civilians would need to be killed to break organized resistance. They had identified which cities to target for maximum psychological impact. They had planned the genocide of his people as a routine military exercise. The most horrifying discovery was a document called the Terran Strategic Assessment. The file contained a comprehensive analysis of human military capabilities compared to all known galactic powers. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. In a general war involving all major species, the humans projected a 93% probability of total victory. The assessment was not based on wishful thinking or propaganda. It was a coldly analytical evaluation of technological capabilities, industrial capacity, strategic resources, and what the humans called warfighting efficiency. They had studied their potential enemies with scientific precision and concluded that they could defeat them all. Engineer Nina Foster's technical reports revealed the true scope of human weapons development. The electromagnetic pulse devices used against the Korth were considered primitive field expedients. Her laboratory had developed weapons that could disrupt the quantum matrices holding matter together, cause controlled gravitational collapses, and manipulate time flow in localized areas. These weapons existed not as theoretical concepts but as functional prototypes. The humans had built devices capable of destroying star systems and had tested them in remote areas of space. They possessed the technology to rewrite the laws of physics in localized regions and had weaponized discoveries that other species used for peaceful research. The human approach to warfare extended far beyond simple violence. They had developed economic weapons that could destabilize entire galactic sectors, psychological warfare techniques that could drive enemy populations to madness, and biological agents that could rewrite the genetic structure of target species. Dr. Kim's latest research involved what she called evolutionary warfare. The concept involved releasing agents that would cause gradual genetic changes in enemy populations over multiple generations. The affected species would slowly lose the ability to reproduce, eventually facing extinction through carefully engineered sterility. The weapon was designed to appear as a natural genetic drift rather than deliberate attack. By the time the target species realized what was happening, the damage would be irreversible. Entire civilizations could be eliminated while appearing to die from natural causes. Zephi found references to something called Project Looking Glass, a human research initiative focused on predicting and manipulating the behavior of alien species. The project had successfully modeled the decision-making processes of every major galactic power and could predict their responses to various stimuli with over 90% accuracy. The humans were not simply preparing for war. They were preparing to control the galaxy through a combination of military force, economic manipulation, and psychological dominance. They had studied their future subjects with the thoroughness of farmers planning a crop rotation. Admiral Sullivan's personal logs revealed the most chilling aspect of human planning. The current conflict with the Korth Empire was not an isolated event, but the first phase of a carefully orchestrated campaign to establish human dominance over the galaxy. Each subsequent conflict would be larger, more sophisticated, and more devastating than the last. The humans were not seeking to defend themselves or expand their territory. They were conducting a systematic campaign to eliminate all potential threats to their species. Every major galactic power was scheduled for eventual conquest or destruction. The timeline extended over several centuries, but the outcome was predetermined. As Zephi compiled his data, he realized that he was not observing a minor conflict between two species. He was witnessing the opening moves of a war that would eventually encompass the entire galaxy. The humans had decided that they could not coexist with other sentient species and were methodically preparing to eliminate all competition. The young researcher faced a decision that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. He could report what he had learned and watch as panicked species launched desperate preemptive strikes against humanity. Or he could remain silent and allow the humans to continue their preparations undisturbed until it was too late for anyone to stop them. The battle for Haven's Rest entered its 5th day, and HFY found himself witnessing something that would haunt his dreams for cycles to come. What he had initially assumed would be a simple documentation of human defeat had transformed into an education in the true depths of human warfare. The remaining human defenders, now numbering fewer than 200, had done the impossible. They had stopped the Korth advance. Captain Ryan Davis had spent the night in what the humans called psychological operations. HFY monitored the communications channels and discovered that Davis had been broadcasting messages in perfect Korth dialect, using cultural references and historical events that should have been unknown to any human. The content of these transmissions was designed to create doubt and fear among the Korth ranks. The messages referenced Korth military disasters from centuries past, quoted from their religious texts in ways that suggested divine displeasure with the current campaign, and even included personal details about individual Korth commanders that could only have been obtained through extensive intelligence gathering. HFY realized that Davis was not improvising these psychological attacks. The humans had spent months, perhaps years, preparing for this specific conflict. When HFY analyzed the human intelligence files, he discovered something that made his 3 hearts skip beats. The humans had detailed psychological profiles of every major Korth military leader. They knew about family relationships, personal fears, religious beliefs, and political ambitions. They had studied their enemies with the thoroughness of scientists, cataloging a new species. The psychological warfare was having visible effects on the Korth forces. Units that had advanced with perfect discipline for 4 days were now hesitating before entering combat zones. Korth commanders were spending precious time verifying orders and questioning intelligence reports. The humans had somehow managed to introduce uncertainty into a military machine renowned for its efficiency. Engineer Nina Foster provided HFY with his next lesson in human adaptability. When the Korth deployed energy shield technology that neutralized most human weapons, Foster's response was not despair but immediate analysis. She spent 18 hours in what appeared to be a makeshift laboratory, surrounded by salvaged Korth equipment and human electronics. The result was a weapon system that should not have been possible to create under battlefield conditions. Foster had somehow designed an electromagnetic pulse device using parts scavenged from destroyed human vehicles and captured Korth technology. The device was crude, unreliable, and dangerous to operate, but it worked. The energy shields that had made Korth troops nearly invulnerable suddenly became useless. What disturbed HFY most was not the technical achievement, but the speed with which the humans had adapted. Most species required months or years to develop countermeasures for new enemy technology. The humans had done it in less than a day, working under combat conditions with limited resources. They seemed to treat technological challenges as puzzles, to be solved rather than insurmountable obstacles. The human approach to casualties revealed another aspect of their alien psychology. When Sergeant Alex Thompson's squad was pinned down by Korth fire, the human response was not to retreat or call for support. Instead, they analyzed the situation and determined that one soldier could reach a flanking position if the others provided covering fire. The mission would likely result in casualties, but it would accomplish their tactical objective. Thompson volunteered for what the humans called a suicide run. He sprinted across open ground under heavy fire, carrying explosives that would destroy the Korth position. He succeeded in his mission but died in the explosion. The other humans marked his position on their tactical maps, reported the successful completion of objectives, and immediately began planning their next move. There was no pause for grief, no time spent mourning the loss of a comrade. Thompson's sacrifice was noted, recorded and incorporated into their tactical planning as simply another data point. HFY realized that humans had somehow learned to function normally while constantly calculating acceptable losses among their own people. The most horrifying discovery came when HFY gained access to human military databases through intercepted communications. The files revealed that the humans classified their current conflict with the Korth Empire as a minor engagement. The term used in their reports was police action, suggesting they considered this level of warfare to be routine law enforcement, rather than existential combat. Lieutenant Commander Scott Warner, monitoring the battle from a human ship in orbit, discussed the engagement with his staff as if it were a training exercise. His concerns were not about winning or losing, but about whether their newer personnel were gaining valuable combat experience. Warner expressed satisfaction that the conflict was proceeding according to human projections and providing useful data for future encounters. The files contained references to something called total war, a concept that HFY struggled to comprehend. The humans had apparently developed military doctrines that involved the complete mobilization of their entire species for warfare. They had strategies for conflicts that would last not days or months, but years or decades. They planned for casualties, numbering in the millions, and had accepted such losses as necessary costs for achieving strategic objectives. Dr. Sarah Kim, a human scientist attached to the military forces, was conducting what she called battlefield research. She was studying Korth biology, weapons technology, and tactical doctrine in real time during active combat. Her goal was not immediate tactical advantage, but long-term strategic preparation for future conflicts with similar species. Kim's research methods involved capturing live Korth soldiers for examination, analyzing the psychological effects of different weapons on Korth physiology, and testing various interrogation techniques to determine optimal information extraction procedures. She approached these activities with the same clinical detachment that HFY's own people brought to studying plant genetics. The human concept of escalation provided another glimpse into their alien mindset. When the Korth began targeting civilian evacuation ships, the human response was not proportional retaliation. Instead, they implemented what they called strategic deterrence. Human forces began systematically hunting Korth supply convoys, destroying fuel depots, and targeting command infrastructure far behind enemy lines. The escalation was calculated and methodical. For every civilian transport attacked, the humans destroyed 3 Korth supply ships. For every non-combatant killed, they eliminated a Korth command post. They were not acting from emotion or revenge, but implementing a predetermined response matrix designed to modify enemy behavior through negative reinforcement. Admiral Kate Sullivan, commanding the human space forces, explained the strategy in terms that made HFY's fur stand on end. The humans were teaching the Korth Empire that attacking human civilians would result in costs far exceeding any tactical benefits. They were training their enemies like laboratory animals, using punishment and reward to shape behavior patterns. The Korth commander, General Vextor, had spent his career conquering peaceful species that surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. He had no experience dealing with an enemy that fought harder when threatened, adapted quickly to new tactics, and seemed to view warfare as an intellectual exercise rather than a struggle for survival. By the 6th day, Vextor was requesting reinforcements from the Korth High Command. His reports described human resistance as unprecedented and recommended a complete reevaluation of their intelligence regarding human military capabilities. The species that was supposed to provide easy conquest had instead inflicted casualties that exceeded Korth projections by over 300%. HFY monitored the human communications and discovered that their forces were operating at what they considered 15% of maximum effort. The weapons systems being deployed were described as conventional armaments suitable for police actions. References were made to strategic assets being held in reserve for more serious conflicts. The young researcher began to understand that what he was witnessing was not human beings fighting for survival, but human beings conducting a field test of their military capabilities against a known enemy. They were learning, adapting, and documenting everything for future reference. The Korth Empire had become unwilling participants in a human military exercise. The realization that filled Zeph-Hi with dread was simple and terrifying. If this was how humans fought when they considered a conflict to be minor, what would they be capable of if they ever felt truly threatened? The galaxy had never encountered a species that approached warfare with such systematic intelligence and casual acceptance of violence. The attack began at dawn on Haven's Rest, just as Zeph-Hi had positioned his cloaked vessel in optimal observation range. The Korth Empire fleet moved with the precision that had made them feared across 3 galactic sectors. Their black ships descended through the planet's atmosphere like falling stones, energy weapons already charging for the initial bombardment. Zeph-Hi watched through his sensors as the Korth deployed in textbook formation. 200 warships arranged in perfect geometric patterns with heavy cruisers providing cover for the smaller attack craft. It was a display of overwhelming force designed to break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. According to Galactic military doctrine, the humans should have requested surrender negotiations within the first hour. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human defenders did not retreat to prepared positions or attempt to parley. Colonel Jake Morrison, the human military commander, issued orders that Zeph-Hi's translation system struggled to process. The humans were not just staying to fight, they were actively seeking engagement with a superior force. Zeph-Hi adjusted his sensors to focus on the human defensive positions scattered across Haven's Rest. What he observed defied everything he knew about survival instincts. Human soldiers were digging deeper into their fortifications rather than abandoning them. Supply teams continued moving ammunition and equipment forward instead of evacuating valuable resources. Most bizarre of all, civilian transport ships were launching from the planet's surface, but they carried only non-combatants. Every human capable of fighting remained behind. The first Korth bombardment lit up the dawn sky with energy beams that could melt through mountain rock. Zeph-Hi expected to see immediate human casualties and the beginning of a rout. Instead, the humans had somehow predicted the attack patterns and relocated their primary defensive positions during the night. The devastating barrage struck mostly empty ground. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled across the communication channels as he coordinated the human response. There was no panic in his tone, no desperate calls for retreat. He spoke with the calm precision of someone discussing routine maintenance schedules. Delta Company, confirm your new positions. Echo Squad, begin harassment fire on Grid 77. Medical teams, prepare for incoming wounded but maintain current positions. Zeph-Hi realized with growing alarm that the humans had planned for this exact scenario. They were not reacting to the Korth attack. They were implementing a prepared strategy. This level of premeditation in warfare was something his peaceful people had never encountered. The ground assault began 2 hours after the orbital bombardment failed to break human resistance. Korth shock troops, each standing twice the height of an average human and equipped with personal energy shields, advanced across the colony's main valley. Their tactic was simple and proven: advance in overwhelming numbers until the enemy broke and ran. But the humans did not run. Instead, they did something that made Zeph-Hi's fur stand on end with dread. They began targeting the Korth advance with weapons that seemed designed specifically to counter Korth technology. Electromagnetic pulse grenades disabled the energy shields. Kinetic projectiles punched through Korth armor at joints and weak points that should have been unknown to human tactical planning. Sergeant Alex Thompson led a squad of just 12 human soldiers in a flanking maneuver against a Korth formation of over 40 troops. Zeph-Hi watched in fascination and horror as the humans used the terrain, their smaller size, and what appeared to be superior knowledge of Korth blind spots to inflict devastating casualties before melting back into cover. The most disturbing aspect was not the violence itself, but the methodical nature of it. The humans fought like scientists conducting an experiment. They tested different approaches, analyzed the results, and adapted their tactics in real time. When one strategy failed, they immediately tried another. When it succeeded, they refined it and shared the information across their entire force. Lisa Carter, a human medic, provided Zeph-Hi with his first glimpse into the truly alien nature of human thinking. When the medical station came under direct Korth fire, Carter's response was not to seek cover or retreat to safety. Instead, she grabbed her medical supplies and ran directly into the combat zone to retrieve wounded soldiers. She made 4 separate trips into active fire zones, each time returning with an injured human. What made this behavior incomprehensible to HFY was that Carter was not a combat specialist. Her biological readings showed elevated stress hormones and fear responses that should have paralyzed her with terror. Yet she continued functioning, driven by something stronger than her survival instincts. When HFY analyzed her communications, he discovered she was not following orders. The decision to risk her life repeatedly was entirely her own. As the battle continued into its second day, HFY began to notice patterns that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. When the Korth succeeded in overrunning a defensive position, the human response was not retreat, but immediate counterattack. They seemed to consider lost ground as a temporary setback, rather than a reason for surrender. Captain Ryan Davis demonstrated another aspect of human warfare that HFY found deeply unsettling. Davis had somehow acquired detailed knowledge of Korth language and psychology, which he used to broadcast messages designed to demoralize the enemy forces. The content of these messages showed an understanding of Korth culture that went far beyond what should have been possible for a species with no previous contact. When HFY traced the source of this information, he discovered that humans had been studying the Korth Empire for months before this conflict began. They had intercepted communications, analyzed captured equipment, and even sent covert operatives to observe Korth military exercises. The humans had prepared for this war, with the thoroughness of researchers planning a scientific expedition. The third day brought what should have been the end of human resistance. The Korth commander, frustrated by unexpected casualties and delays, committed his elite units to a final assault on the human command center. These were the finest warriors the Korth Empire could produce, veterans of dozens of successful campaigns. The human response was to trigger a series of predetermined explosions that collapsed several buildings onto the advancing Korth forces. The explosions had been prepared before the battle began, demonstrating that the humans had always planned to destroy their own infrastructure rather than allow it to fall into enemy hands. This level of premeditation and willingness to accept losses was something no peaceful species could understand. Colonel Morrison emerged from the rubble of his command post with a bleeding head wound, but continued issuing orders. His first priority was not medical attention for himself, but confirmation that his troops were implementing Fallback Plan 7. HFY discovered that the humans had developed 17 different contingency plans for various stages of defeat, each more desperate and destructive than the last. By the end of the 4th day, the Korth forces had achieved what should have been total victory. They controlled most of the planet's surface, had eliminated the majority of human defensive positions, and surrounded the remaining human forces in an area less than 2 kilometers wide. According to every known model of warfare, the humans should have surrendered. Instead, they began what they called a final defensive action. The remaining humans, fewer than 300 combat-effective personnel, established overlapping fields of fire and prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Their communications were full of references to historical human battles where small forces had inflicted massive casualties on superior enemies before being overwhelmed. HFY realized with growing horror that the humans considered this entire engagement to be normal. They spoke of defeat and death with the same casual tone other species used to discuss weather patterns. They had mentally prepared for the possibility of complete annihilation and accepted it as a reasonable price for achieving their military objectives. The young researcher found himself faced with data that challenged his fundamental understanding of intelligent behavior. The humans were not savage primitives driven by bloodlust. They were thinking, planning beings who had somehow evolved to view warfare as just another problem to be solved through careful analysis and methodical application of violence. HFY stood before the massive viewing screen in the council chambers and felt his 3 hearts beat faster than usual. The young Veltar researcher had never been this close to the inner circle of galactic power before. Around him sat representatives from dozens of species, all older and more experienced than his mere 40 cycles of life. The air recyclers hummed quietly as they adjusted the atmosphere to accommodate the various breathing requirements of the assembled beings. The Grand Counselor, an ancient Theklan, whose crystalline form had grown cloudy with age, gestured toward the holographic display that showed a sector map of the Outer Rim territories. Red markers indicated areas of conflict, and there were far too many of them for Zeph-Hi's comfort. His own people, the Veltar, had evolved from peaceful herd animals on the grasslands of Vel Prime. The concept of deliberate violence between thinking beings still made his fur stand on end. "Young researcher," the Grand Counselor's voice resonated through the chamber like wind through crystal caves. "Your academic record in xenobiology is impressive. Your species' natural empathy and observational skills make you ideal for this assignment." The counselor paused, and Zeph-Hi noticed how the other representatives shifted in their seats. "We need someone to study the humans." Zeph-Hi had heard whispers about humans in the academic corridors. They were a new species, barely 50 of their years since achieving faster-than-light travel. Most species took centuries to develop peaceful contact protocols before venturing into space. The Terror humans had apparently skipped that step entirely. Within a decade of their first interstellar voyage, they had already been involved in 3 separate conflicts with established galactic powers. "The humans present a unique case study," continued the Grand Counselor. "Most species that reach the stars have evolved beyond their primitive violent tendencies. The humans appear to have brought their conflicts with them." The hologram shifted to show a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. "This is their homeworld. Our preliminary scans suggest they have been in constant warfare with themselves for their entire recorded history." The revelation made Zeph-Hi's stomach turn. His own people had brief territorial disputes in their ancient past, resolved through collective decision-making and ritual displays. The idea of continuous conflict over thousands of years seemed impossible to comprehend. How could a species survive that long while constantly fighting itself? "Currently," the Grand Counselor explained, "the humans are engaged in conflict with the Korth Empire over territorial rights to several colony worlds. The Korth, as you know, are efficient militarists. They should provide an excellent baseline for comparison." The hologram zoomed in on a system where human and Korth fleets were positioned near a planet marked as Haven's Rest. "Your mission is to observe human military behavior during this conflict and compile a comprehensive behavioral analysis." Zeph-Hi felt his ears flatten against his skull, a sure sign of nervousness among his kind. "Honored Counselor, surely. There are researchers with more experience in conflict studies who would be better suited for this assignment." The ancient being's form seemed to pulse with what might have been amusement. "Your inexperience with warfare is precisely why you were chosen. We need fresh eyes, uncontaminated by preconceptions about military strategy. Your reports will help us determine whether humans represent a threat to galactic stability or simply another species that needs guidance toward peaceful coexistence." The meeting continued for another hour, as various council members provided Zeph-Hi with technical specifications for his observation equipment and research parameters. He would be equipped with the latest cloaking technology, allowing his small research vessel to remain undetected while studying the conflict. The mission was expected to last no more than a few weeks, given the Korth Empire's reputation for swift and decisive military action. As the council session ended, Zeph-Hi gathered his data tablets and prepared to leave. The weight of the assignment settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had spent his academic career studying peaceful species, documenting their social structures and cultural development. The closest he had come to violence was observing territorial disputes between non-sentient creatures. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Zeph-Hi's research vessel, the Harmony Seeker, was fitted with advanced sensors and recording equipment. The ship's AI was programmed with translation protocols for both human and Korth languages, though initial scans suggested human languages were remarkably diverse for such a young spacefaring species. On his final day before departure, Zeph-Hi visited his mentor Dr. Velshara at the University of Interspecies Studies. The elderly female's silver fur had long since turned white with age, and her wise eyes held the knowledge of centuries spent studying galactic civilizations. "I fear I am not prepared for this assignment," Zephi admitted as they walked through the university's botanical gardens. How does one study something as alien as warfare? Dr. Velshara was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of students from various species working together on a research project. Remember, young one, that even the most violent species are still thinking beings. They have reasons for their actions, even if those reasons seem incomprehensible to us. Your job is not to judge, but to understand. She turned to face him, her expression serious. But be careful, Zephi. Sometimes understanding something dangerous makes it more frightening, not less. The council expects an objective report, but you must decide for yourself what truth you are willing to share. The next morning, Zephi departed Veltar space, aboard the Harmony Seeker. The journey to human territory would take 8 days through hyperspace. He spent the time reviewing everything known about humans and the Korth Empire. The data was sparse but troubling. Humans seemed to approach conflict with a creativity that other species found disturbing. They adapted quickly, learned from defeats, and showed an unusual willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of their goals. As his ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's rest system, Zephi activated the cloaking systems and began his approach to the planet. Long-range sensors immediately detected the positioning of both human and Korth fleets. The humans appeared to be heavily outnumbered, which should make for a quick study. The Korth would likely achieve victory within days, allowing Zephi to document human surrender protocols and return home with a complete report. He settled into his observation post and began recording. Within hours, he would witness his first example of human warfare. Nothing in his peaceful upbringing had prepared him for what he was about to see.